So, after what I think is my 11th campaign in Baldur's Gate 3, though I haven't beaten the beta yet, I finally figured out a more or less simple way to defeat both Commander Jolk and the rest of the Cambions in the ship battle at the end of the tutorial. As I am one who often goes on tangents and deviate from the main topic, here's a timestamp for those who just want to go directly to that information, but for those patient individuals in the room, let's talk about Baldur's Gate 3 for a moment and how I got here. Like most people, my first campaign was pretty standard. I connected the transponders now, was slapped in the face by some mystery meat like I was having a good time at a gay bar, semi-crash landed on the beach, fell in love with Shadowheart, again pretty standard,
Please.
then went on my merry way to get party wiped because I thought the nice lady having a shield meant that she was a tank. No. And just to get this out there, I hated Baldur's Gate 3's combat at first because I didn't understand D&D. Why is everything random? Where's my accuracy? Does a weapon having die papal tagged on it means it scales with dexterity? How do weapons scale? The hell does die papal mean? Why do the first enemies outside the tutorial hit so friggin' hard? Etc, etc. On my second campaign, no longer worrying about actually beating the beta, and carrying just a bit of salt assuming only specific builds can win certain encounters, I experimented, then naturally, my dumb and simple questions were eventually answered. This is not an RPG, it's a D&D. Everything's determined by the roll of a die, and though I still don't like that, I came to accept it. No, die papal is not for dexterity, that's finesse weapons. All melee weapons get increased damage potential from strength, while ranged weapons and melee weapons tagged with finesse get it from dexterity. That potential from these two stats may not stack, as the game will simply choose whichever one that modifies damage the most. In terms of combat, the idea of it reminds me a bit of Fire Emblem when I first played Awakening. Instead of just having raw numbers and pinning them against the enemy, you have to stack the odds in your favor. What about die papal? Dippable, bro. Oh. Anyway, I got really content with the game after getting the hang of it. However, some of that changed on my third campaign, where I learned the difficulty in Baldur's Gate 3 is what I would refer to as Dark Souls difficulty. Side note, I just remembered it's something of a meme to say a game is as difficult as Dark Souls, or really compared it anyway, such as, it's not Dark Souls, but yeah, I get it. If that kind of thing bothers you, my bad. I make comparisons to games I really know mechanically and care about. If I were going to express how a game used minimalism well, or how it sacrificed some conventional means to get a point across, I compare it to something like Undertale. I think about games a lot, I think about them critically, often. In this explanation, it just so happens to be Dark Souls. But back to that descriptor and how it's used in this instance, Dark Souls difficulty very much stems from the intimidation of the title and or lack of knowledge from it. And I'll explain why I don't personally like that in a moment. At least in this game.
Wait a minute.
Mm-hmm.
You're telling me the more you know about these games, the easier they become?
Yes.
And that information is actually more viable than just having skill or being good at them naturally?
Absolutely.
Okay, I can see that for Baldur's Gate, but how does that work for Dark Souls?
Nice of you to ask, theoretically curious viewer. Though Dark Souls falls under the action genre of role-playing games, I think it's better described as a real-time, turn-based RPG. And apologies to the people whose brains just did a 180. I would go into further detail, but I'm already stretching very thin with how far I can go off topic here. Who knows, maybe I'll make another video about it. But, back to Baldur's Gate, you may be asking yourself, what could I have learned beyond simple weakness factors and big, out-of-the-way exploits that will make a fight in a game like this easier, while also being accessible to most kinds of players or types of characters? Well, that. For anyone having trouble with these enemies, the intellect devourers, you're able to throw them just outside their attack range and make the fight more or less trivial. Tricks like these, however, are things I do appreciate, especially in similar encounters. I'm reminded of using the stick in Undertale as an item for all dog-type enemies. It's really just a funny tidbit that saves time on subsequent playthroughs. Throwing is something you can technically do with most enemies in the game, if you have the strength for it, though you'd probably have to drink a strength potion for all that. Otherwise, it's something you can only exploit on lighter enemies. At any strength, you should be able to throw these devourers, and I'm going to assume you need at least 14 to throw goblins, redcaps, and halflings, while dwarves are actually very hefty. After getting pretty far in the 2.0 build with my cousin, then nearly beating the beta in 3.0, it wasn't until just recently in the 4.0 build did I see that Cambions were 50 kilograms. A weight I remember being able to throw when I played as a character who was something more of a warrior. And yes, you can find this out simply by checking the enemy, but the slight color difference for if you're able to or not was a bit too subtle to notice at first. Now, to take on the Cambions in this way, unless you have enough strength, Lae'zel is your star pitcher, having 17 herself. The strength needed to throw them, something I found out thanks to the person I dream of at night, is 16. For those curious, you need 14 to throw Lae'zel, but I digress. If you just throw the Cambions, you'll get by well enough. The faster way is to throw them at these caustic bulbs on the ceiling, but not this one. This one specifically. They'll get stuck. This is faster because after that, they take damage from being thrown, falling, then the explosion damage from the bulb, which doesn't happen if you just shoot it down normally for some reason, or maybe that just randomly doesn't happen sometimes. And just another note that actually doesn't matter too much in this fight, fall damage and throw damage are two different things. Fall damage is calculated by the height from which the pushed or fallen has felled, while throw damage I think is calculated by the weight of the throwee. So no matter how high you are, how much damage you think something should take from it, gravity is completely factored out when you throw them. Now to start off the fight, blow up this tank to deal with these imps quicker. Because of how helpful explosions tend to be in games like this, I found that being a high elf, or half high elf if you didn't miss the finer details, with the fireball cantrip is super nice. With the druid and the flame toss ability, you'd be able to get pretty much the same effect. However, if you didn't start off with a like or a bow, again Lae'zel is your girl. You're able to dip her bow in this fire pit at the beginning of the fight and then shoot the tank with fire damage that way instead. If, and this is likely, you don't have the initiative to blow them up immediately, you can still potentially salvage it. Otherwise, don't worry too much because it's honestly not that big of a deal. Sadly, this does not work if you dip your melee weapon and throw it, nor does it alight the mystery liquid, and I'm guessing that also means grease by an extension. It would be ideal to take out all the imps including the reinforcements before the other two Cambions show up, or at least before they get close. I'm not showing all this fight because it does drag on, so I'm going to go over how to make it go by faster. Use only one side of the ceiling for the bulbs to command Ujolk, then whichever side still has bulbs, climb the stairs of it and take advantage of the high ground and exploit the game mechanics like the little degenerate you are. Take note that if you take out the commander before the Mind Flayer is defeated, it will become a third-party hostile, but you can just throw them too. Also, the Cambions have a lot of evasion compared to most other enemies you'll encounter in the rest of the game. Because of that, True Strike will help if you have to attack them normally. This, along with Witch Bolt because after it connects the first time, all subsequent follow-ups will just hit, until you break concentration, which just seems to happen in this fight. Sometimes the AI will stop them from advancing because it's like they know what you're trying to do. Like one time, the bugger attacked a void bulb I didn't bother picking up and it pulled Lae'zel off the balcony. That level of AI is kinda scary. Anyway, simply damaging them is usually enough to force them forward. If you're going to use your very precious Nodolite tanks in this fight, it doesn't explode unless you throw it directly onto fire, and you do need at least 12 strength to handle them. Otherwise, when they advance, get Lae'zel to throw them at a ceiling bulb like I mentioned earlier, and if both of them have to be up there at the same time, be mindful of your positioning and their attack range. Void bulbs that you use can help with positioning as well, and pretty neat to have a Horde Breaker for fellow ranger lovers, but of course not here. Remember that throwing anything costs an action, but pushing costs a bonus action, though not all that accurate. This means you're guaranteed to get a one-off but have to push the other should it come down to it, but both party members are still able to do so on the same turn. You're not limited to only throwing items, by the way. Remember you can throw potions too, which is helpful in a situation where the player character or co-op buddy is not a healer. The trajectory isn't always accurate, so watch for the line that's a wall or ledge or something. And when you throw it, never aim exactly on a party member because it still damages them. I think it's able to kill, but if not, what they heal for is subtracted by that damage. If a potion bottle hits the ground, the liquid inside will become terrain and consumed by the first person to traverse it. Lae'zel has the magic hand cantrip. You can use this little bugger to help push them around also, but for some reason it just goes? Again, concentration seems to break randomly here, so summon Magic Hand when the Cambions are able to get near you the next turn. Push is 100% accurate in stealth, but if you summon it and it's not in combat, be sure to put it in turn-based mode so it won't waste turns. And speaking of little buggers, us can help with DPS and aggro, but don't rely on them. If you do all this correctly, then you probably only needed to reload 3 times because I swear this game has some weird mechanic that just stops you from being too flashy or too cheeky in any way. Oh my god, game! That aside, you might be wondering what you get from defeating 3 Cambions one of which is level 8 mind you, the other 2 level 5, and a level 6 mind flayer, all at level 1. Well, I'm happy to answer you get not just 1, but 3 greatswords. That's it. That's the loot. Well, don't worry, because that's not the big prize here. After winning this fight, you're actually able to go back to Shadowheart and die. All jokes aside, the only valuable thing you get is an early level up if you fought almost everything in the tutorial, which may not seem like much, but it's the only way to get to level 3, as far as I know, before the goblin fight, and the allure of that is simply having a better chance to save these 3 knuckleheads who fight like it's their first campaign, and seem to be personally disliked by the game itself. This reminds me of beating the Unspeakable Deep in Salt and Sanctuary. It's convenient to do in the long run, but you won't be missing out on much if you don't do it. And that pretty much covers this video's namesake. That said, don't subscribe to me thinking I make content because that's not something I do. And shout out to the people who forget to clear out their subscriptions and randomly have my videos in their feeds. I appreciate people like you specifically. Now for the subtopic, and gaining the ability to talk all I want, you're probably wondering what I meant by Dark Souls difficulty and why I don't like it in this game. Well, to be fair, it's more skepticism than actual distaste, but the answer is, I simply wasn't expecting it. After playing the entire Souls series and getting into both Souls-inspired and Souls games alike, which includes Nioh 2 and Code Vein as of recently, I'm a bit drained on it, and from my definition of Dark Souls difficulty, you can't really achieve it unless the game is either boring, superficial by extension, or fundamentally well designed to where most players in a variety of builds, along with some creativity, can get by if they have their wits about them. Luckily, Larian has proven that they know what the hell they're doing, so also luckily, it's looking to lean more towards the latter. However, the skepticism really comes from knowing that despite which line the game does fall in, it's going to be stressful. There's a lot of fundamental movement flaws I have with Code Vein that makes about everything not clunky, but rigid, which is arguably worse. And one very specific design choice in Nier Automata, the character's pivoting of all things in a game that has bullet hell as a subgenre, that ruined the entire game for me. Finally, in terms of Nioh 2, the game's great all around, but I remember watching a Fighting Cowboy stream and there was this one comment that pretty much summed up the combat loop. Melt or be melted, they said. And while it's easy to assume this game's a button masher if you don't understand the mechanics and how the skill trees work, it isn't. Oof. What a terrible way to die. But it doesn't change that eventually the combat degrades into simply overwhelming the opponent. It's like an out-of-date MMO boss raid. Yeah, you could learn the inner workings of the boss mechanics, or you could just stack DPS. Essentially, that skepticism comes from this type of difficulty needing to stay both consistent but fresh, else it can easily get annoying or oversimplified. Throwing is a mechanic that can easily oversimplify this game. While I do hope the attack option stays, it would be nice if it got nerfed, like specifically add a saving throw for the damage or being thrown itself. I was suggesting Constitution. Dexterity is probably the first stat that comes to mind with how it's often related to finesse or graceful movement, but there's already so much it has going for it. Plus, it actually just means skill finish with your hands. Otherwise, maybe a bonus action on tougher enemies that grounds them like Pin Down or Entangle does. I'm sorry, but having an attack that does crowd control, technically an AoE, deals consistently decent damage, and has 100% accuracy on at least one of those targets is a bit absurd. And I know the idea of wanting this nerf sounds crazy because you have the option not to do it, which is a valid point, but sometimes the option to do something is the problem in of itself. Also, if it's something the player can do, it would upset me if the enemy couldn't. But if the enemy did do something like this, say trolls, hobgoblins, bugbears, or the Cambions, anything with 16 strength and above, I'd just be angry. And remember, I'm not saying Baldur's Gate is a Souls-like, nor am I comparing it to those types of games directly, but a very specific quality these games have in common, a quality that falls apart if the player ain't available with the fundamentals, or if after the player gets it, and the game becomes, not easier, but too simple. And of course, this is case by case, very opinionated, very subjective, but in Dark Souls, when you do get it, you have to at least go out of your way to oversimplify it. The Giant Dad build, having the Black Knight Halberd, Ascended Pyromancy, Dark Moonblade, Dark Magic, etc, etc. From my understanding of a game made like this, let's say, deceptively accessible, the best that could happen when the game releases are, I beat the game and after braving my first journey, like Dark Souls 2 and 1, it becomes a game I can just sit down and relax to while trying out different character ideas and builds. The worst, either I stumble upon some random exploit and lose interest mid-game, or every time I try to branch out from standard tactics, a battle becomes too tedious and I just default to what works, ending with that fight needing only very minimum effort.
And I realized I can beat Damon in melee, but it's boring and it's RNG based because if I'm unlucky with when he casts his sucking spell and he kills all of my pawns, there's nothing I can do about it. If I try to climb on him while he's casting that spell, he can drain my stamina so fast that I can instantly get staggered and get killed. And so it just became very frustrating. So then I was like, okay, I think it's time to go back to Assassin. But it's just like, I find having the advantage of being able to aim is just so overpowered, is like the most overpowered thing. At this point, we pull out the bow. We pull out a couple of blast arrows and watch this. It's gonna be like, I'm a charge in my fucking overpowered spell. Yeah! And I'm just gonna be like, okay. Fuck you and your overpowered spells. One shot. As one shot. But wait, it gets worse.
All in all, again, Baldur's Gate 3 is a D&D, not an RPG. Not bad, just concerning. To me. That's all I meant. So if you tried the bit out yourself and didn't really get into it, or are looking to try it out sometime soon, it is something you need to learn before you'll know if you'll like this or not. So, Divinity fans, be aware that even though it's made by the same studio, and generally has the same idea, it is something different altogether. If you're a Dark Souls fan that somehow stumbled their way into here, yes, even though these two games are completely different, and everyone plays Dark Souls for their own set of reasons, I think some people will get this. If you don't mind turn-based combat, and you like Souls for having, and persevering through your own journey, the idea of winning in your own way, I consider giving this a try when the game is fully released, after week 1 patches, if you have the time and money for it. For everyone else, if you're already a D&D fan, I'm sure everything will just come naturally. Anyway, that is finally everything I felt like talking about in this video. I may or may not, probably won't, make a review of sorts when the game eventually comes out. Regardless, thank you all for making it towards the end. Until next time, you guys take care of yourselves. Drink water, stretch, don't be dumb, but if you do so responsibly. This is Coop signing out, and peace. Lizzo, do you mind? Appreciate it, Joanne. How much time we got? Well, we gotta talk, bro. What was that, man? Don't look at me like you don't know. You know what's going on. Yeah, feel bad. Like, how do you feel? Well, bro. Well, bro.